I was requested to do another video in response on current affairs.
If you've been finding the paper hard to read lately, it's probably because you're watching tyrannical douchebags taking over governments from Brazil to Italy to the United States.
What's that got to do with capitalism?
It's scary to see spreading authoritarianism because most of us want to decide what to do with our lives.
Well, that's magical, because when it comes to socialism, you've got no way of avoiding authoritarianism, because after all, your public ownership is state ownership, and socialism is down to economic central planning. And the issue with socialism is you're faced with the economic calculation problem. Again, I've got videos on that you can check out. And when you're faced with the economic calculation problem, if you've got no information of profits and losses, good luck trying to be democratic in the first place anyhow, because you're not going to know the information of people's needs and wants.
To be free, in other words. But according to conservatives, we're already free.
These type of conservatives that do try to call this system today as something capitalist, I have to actually question their logic.
For instance, take YouTube star and prominent right-wing douchebag Ben Shapiro.
Tonight's lecture is titled, "You're Free, Stop Whining." Capitalism is not a power hierarchy. It's about the power that resides in you as an individual human being.
Shapiro's angry yapping seems to suggest the idea that since you can choose whom you buy products from or for whom to work, you have freedom.
So I can understand where Ben Shapiro's coming from. He's speaking about capitalism in general. Of course, today you live in a corporatist system. Of course, I could go into the whole argument in that. He's speaking about the freedom to choose in terms of freedom to choose whether you work for yourself or, of course, work for another private company or whatever.
This reminds me of when the great conservative economist Milton Friedman wrote with his co-author wife Rose in their book Free to Choose, "When you enter a store, no one forces you to buy. You are free to do so or go elsewhere. You are free to choose."
I don't understand where you're coming from, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is conflate today's economy based around his book Free to Choose. The United States of America is not a free market economy, it's for half it. I mean, you're talking about the United States of America where the private sector's all regulated by the government.
But other respected figures see the market's alleged freedom somewhat differently. Consider, for instance, Frederick Douglass, the escaped slave and self-taught intellectual. He's so cool, even the greatest minds of our era recognize his genius.
Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I notice.
Well, Douglass concluded, "Experience demonstrates that there may be a slavery of wages only a little less galling and crushing in its effects than chattel slavery, and that this slavery of wages must go down with the other."
It's this whole issue with inflation that your socialism caused, or your socialist government interventionism, and you took away the free market money. That's right, freedom. We're talking about capitalism here. When you speak about capitalism, you speak about the market determining what your money is. That was gold and silver. Now, where is that free market money? That's right, it's not there, because your socialism interfered in the market. And now you're left with a currency. You're sitting here with a currency. You've been running the printing press. Inflation's been soaring out of control. And that's essentially what's created the problem with the wages.
"The man who has it in his power to say to a man, 'You must work the land for me for such wages as I choose to give,' has a power of slavery over him as real, if not as complete, as he who compels toil under the lash. All that a man hath, he will give for his life."
The very fact that this guy went as far as to even call that slavery goes to prove that this guy is just disingenuous. He's as intellectual as Karl Marx, which is to say, he's not even intellectual at all. If you don't understand the definition of slavery, God help you, because what it says to me is you don't even understand the English language. Slavery basically means, in its purest form, that you've not got a choice. It means that you are forced against your will and you had no choice in the issue. That's the very reason why slaves had ball and chains around their ankles. You know, they were forced against their will. How on earth can you conflate somebody who consensually agreed to work for a company? How the hell could you conflate that with slavery?
Here, Douglass is suggesting that markets allow the exercise of power.
Someone who runs their own private company and hires people, then obviously they're the boss of the company and dictate how the company is operated. It's their company, it's their property. What the bloody hell do you expect? Does that mean to say that the individual who works for the company is forced to do so?
But how could a free consumer be enslaved to wages with so many different options for purchasing goods and so many market options for finding different careers? Well, the answer, of course, is that markets concentrate and often tend toward monopoly. Beyond the crystal clear history of Gilded Age monopolies in oil and steel in the familiar histories of Rockefeller and Carnegie.
Lies, and there it is. It's always the same. It's just like Robert Reich or any other socialist who's not even got a clue about economic history, hasn't got a clue about economics. He's the sort of person who believes in the myth of the robber barons. The likes of John D. Rockefeller never held a monopoly. A monopoly by definition, not by my opinion. The word mono meaning singular, monopoly meaning you own the market 100%. It means there's no competition whatsoever. A monopoly means that you own the market 100%. When you go to Google, are you forced to use Google search engine? No, you're not, because you've got other search engines to choose from. And this is exactly the point, because people like this haven't got a clue of what a monopoly is. They just think, oh look, there's big business, therefore there's a monopoly. That means all big business must be all monopolies. Part of the fear around monopolies was that price would be driven up to shaft the consumer. And this was one of the main claims that they used against John D. Rockefeller. They says that in the 1870s, along came this whole issue to do with predatory pricing. Forget the point. The fact that you've never seen a single monopoly in recorded history stem as a result of predatory pricing. Forget that fact. The point being is the fact that this was the accusation. They said that they used predatory pricing, then drive the prices up and shaft the consumer. And that was the claim that was used against the likes of Rockefeller. Well, isn't that rather quite funny and convenient, given the very fact that in 1869 it would cost more than 30 cents per barrel of oil, but by 1885, it would only cost about 8.5 cents a barrel of oil. In other words, even when he held 90% share of the market, his prices continuously dropped. And that's because he had competition on his back. Isn't it rather quite convenient? Because this is the most important point, because they like to go on about, oh, but he would eventually have become a monopoly with 90% share. Oh, really? Is that why, between 1885, when he held 90% share of the market, before his company was broken up in 1911, he only held 62% share of the market, which tells you that the market, naturally through competition coming along, had reduced his market share, just like the market always does. So the claim that they held monopolies is utter nonsense. Number one, because the consumer price index was continuously dropping between 1840 to 1900. Proving that there was a deflationary period, contradicting the entire narrative. And number two, simply because of the fact that, well, you've never seen predatory pricing result in a monopoly. So the only way that you can create a monopoly is by restricting your productive output, and that never happened. All those who were accused of holding monopolies saw their productive output increase dramatically. Again, Thomas J. De Lorenzo had pointed this out, where 17 such industries that he had analysed between 1880 right up to 1890, he saw that their productive output increased overall by 175%. That is significant. That is a complete contradiction of the entire meaning of a monopoly. It's this usual rhetorical garbage to say, well, the market just results in monopolies, but guess what, everybody? I'm not even going to give you any examples. I'm just going to state it as if it's based on truth, and you're just going to buy into the crap that I spout because I said so.
According to the current economic census, today's markets include the 8 largest software publishers coding programs that earn half the market's income.
I don't even understand for the life of me how you could even touch upon that of the income just because a certain company or an industry earns so much money of an income. What's that got to do with the price of cheese?
A market pattern known as oligopoly, a few small giant firms. The 4 biggest snack food corporations produce over half of the total output. 80% of US pet food coming from just 8 firms, often misleadingly labeled as separate brands.
Right, okay, so at least they had the decency to mention about something today with oligopolies and what have you, but I don't understand, again, why he would use today's example as something to do with capitalism when your private sector's all regulated by the government. In other words, you're not even living in a free market economy, so of course you've got a very big problem in the market today. You know, that's why you've got the giant corporations dominating the market and smaller businesses can barely compete, because it's corporatism. That's just the true face of it.
And of course, the new Silicon Valley tech giants are such colossal monopolists that even the joyless reactionaries at The Economist called them out-of-the-box monopolies.
If Facebook, let's just say for example, Facebook was a monopoly, you wouldn't have Twitter. What part of that do you not understand? The fact that you've got Twitter tells you you've got competition, but it's not just Twitter. You've got so many others.
But why not just refuse to do business with today's towering corporate giants and go into business for yourself? As mean elf Ben Shapiro puts it,
you, as an individual, own your own labor. You are in charge of your own labor. You get to decide how you want to alienate that labor, what you wish to trade that labor for. You get to decide the value of your own labor, whether you want to, in fact, work for a given wage. You can trade your goods and services for somebody else's goods and services, making both of you richer. Contrary to popular opinion, when two people make a trade, both sides benefit.
The problem, of course, is that running a business requires capital, the tools and equipment required to produce products. And capital is enormously concentrated.
They make it sound as if the capitalists just got there because it just landed at their feet and just magically appeared, and as if they didn't even have to put in hard work to even get there in the first place. See, they don't even acknowledge what the capitalist has to go through, all the risks involved, the threat of, you know, going into debt, or it could be a failure. There's no guarantee that it's going to be a success. All the risks that they take, all the hard work, they don't acknowledge all that. They just think it just magically appears there, and they just make it sound as if, you know, they just sit there with it and that's it.
The prominent inequality scholar Thomas Piketty found that the richest 10% of US households own 70% of the total national wealth.
We're not going to take Thomas Piketty seriously. We've already been through the very fact that this is a guy who couldn't even get his dates right relative to today with that of the build-up to what caused the Great Depression. He was completely wrong on the taxation, etc. That was even pointed out by Thomas E. Woods Jr. as well, of course, Robert P. Murphy, on the argument against Thomas Piketty. The guy's got no credibility. He's got no credibility in the Great Depression, so what the bloody hell would I believe him on that for? And this is the thing, because we've even heard the same nonsense. It was the same crap where they says, oh well, you know, there's this dangerous concentration of wealth in the hands of the few when it came to the Industrial Revolution with the Gilded Age. Really? Well, that's rather quite funny, because economic historians had pointed out that in that time period between 1840 to 1900, the division of income had remained the same, with 70% going to the workers and the remaining 30% to the capital and resource suppliers, completely contradicting the narrative that there was a dangerous concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. And it was the exact same story, but I've pointed out so many times before, between 1975 right up to 1991, where you actually saw the rich grow richer and the poor grow richer faster, as wages from the bottom 20% had increased by $27,000 plus, but by, you know, the richest income percentile in the same time period between 1975 to 1991, it only increased by $4,000 plus. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from working hard and accumulating your own capital, etc. Well, you could go on about stuff today with the cost of living and stuff like that, but that's your own fault.
And the top 1% alone owns 35% of the nation. And most important, the corporate stock, the shares which represent ownership of the productive capital that's required to make goods and thus ensure that both sides benefit from an exchange, is just as concentrated, with the richest 5% of households holding 67% of U.S. equities, according to the Economic Policy Institute and numerous business sources. Now, this was observed by the great socialist writer and critic of totalitarianism, George Orwell, who wrote, "Free competition means for the great mass of people a tyranny, probably worse, because more irresponsible than that of the state.
You know, this was the same George Orwell who wrote 1984, and it was based on the Soviet Union. Nowhere could you point out where there's been totalitarianism or any sort of dictatorship through free competition in the marketplace. Absolutely nowhere.
The trouble with competitions is that somebody wins them. Now, in reality, philosophers have developed different concepts of freedom.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that you look at competition as something one-sided. Yes, there's always going to be winners and losers when it comes to competition, but you completely ignore the fact that those who lose out can learn and adapt and change. The other side of the benefit of the competition is the fact that the winner is obviously going to benefit the consumer the most. That's essentially what happened as a result of a competitive market.
Including the idea that freedom requires that you not be pushed around by external authorities, an idea called negative freedom. And also, though, our freedom to actually do different things, sometimes called positive freedom. So instead of asking what power centers control me, positive freedom, or positive rights, asks, what am I free to do with the world's opportunities and resources?
And this whole thing today with the positive rights is just erroneous. Number one, because the fact that you seem to think that, you know, this is somehow equality. And number two, because the fact it's coercion. So the first thing, you take for example those who say that healthcare is a right, or they can claim that a job is a right. Well, first of all, you need to force other people. That's right, you need to force other people to pay for the universal healthcare. Well, here's the issue. If someone turns around and says to you, a job is a right, well, you're basically trying to say that the so-called claim of the rights of employees is greater than the right of the employer to disagree. That's essentially what you're saying. So how's there equality in that? You've stripped away the rights of the employer to disagree, the entitlement off the earnings of others. You seem to forget that other folk have to work for that money, so you don't have a right.
So the traditional philosophical view of capitalism is that while it does not provide an undesirable positive freedom to a fair share of the world's production of goods.
To a fair share. That's magical, pal. You know, for years they kept on going on about the NHS, saying that it was available for everyone. That was the rhetoric that was always used. It was available for everyone. Isn't it rather quite convenient that those same people, every single passing decade and every single year of the NHS, where the NHS left countless thousands of people in neglect every single passing year of its entire existence? How the hell on earth did you and your kind draw to the logical conclusion that neglecting thousands every single passing year was available for everyone, where your kind, you know, take the existence of the thousands being neglected every single year and you brush them right under the carpet and you pretend it doesn't even exist? Well, tough shit, because it exists. That is not available for everyone, it's not available to the masses. And you justify that. The problem with your argument is your main American healthcare market is not capitalist and is not a free market in healthcare.
It does leave consumers and workers free to choose among different options, so it provides that negative freedom.
Again, you've just picked up a book by Milton Friedman and he was speaking about a free market economy, and throughout your video you've been speaking about today's economy. How the hell can you pass off today's economy anything in correlation to his book Free to Choose? Milton Friedman was making the argument for a free market economy. That's what his book was based on.
From economic tyranny. But as we've just seen Douglas and Orwell suggesting, any realistic picture of the market economy requires a relatively different view.
I love that one. That's the one, the wee game you play at, where you interfere in the market, you create a problem in the market, you give rise to monopolies, oligopolies and cartels, you drive inflation through the roof, you make people struggle, and after you cause all that via government interference, you then have the audacity to turn around and say, oh, it was all the market's fault.
Capitalism limits both positive and negative freedom.
How on earth does capitalism limit negative freedom and negative rights? Your government's all regulated the private sector. What planet do you live on?
This is because of the huge buildup of power created by the concentration of wealth and corporate control over the economy, meaning the market system not only fails to provide a positive freedom to a fair share of the economy.
How on earth can you say that the market fails to provide freedom to people when government has over-regulated your private sector and strangled it half to death? Do you not seem to understand what the problem is? Government is the culprit. That's why you've no get market freedom today. You know, libertarians and all sorts created these memes that take the mick out the political left, especially that one with the bike. And you take the stick and you stick it, you know, in the spokes of the front wheel, and he goes over the handlebars and then says, oh, you know, it's all the fault of the bike. No, it wasn't the fault of the bike. It was the fact that he took the stick and he stuck it in his spokes and went over the handlebars because it's his own fault. It's the same story. No wonder they made that picture, because it basically describes yourself. You don't seem to understand government created the problem. It's a bit like saying, oh my dear life, look at the expensive costs of the American healthcare market.
Like a right to healthcare.
You don't have a right to healthcare, because in order for the NHS to be paid for, you need to force other people to pay for it. So how then can you sit there and say that you have a right to the earnings of another individual? You do not.
But also fails to preserve negative freedom from the power plays of the 1%'s corporate property. Capitalism, for example, undermined freedom when GM and Ford decided to desert cities like Detroit and Flint, Michigan, for poorer towns and then poorer countries, denying its former workforce any positive freedom to enjoy the industry's enormous revenues.
There is probably a bigger story behind all that, and I wouldn't be bloody well surprised if the very problem for why they did so was government's regulation and government's interference in the market. You're talking about Chicago of all places, man. I can even tell you that Chicago is a place that is rancid, breeding these communists. My God, man. It's a place rancid with it. It's as bad as California. Is it any bloody well surprise why you saw the likes of Detroit end up in shit state?
When Martin Shkreli's company Turing hiked the price of life-saving patented drugs from $13 to $750.
This is the one where, you know, today with the big pharmaceutical companies and they shafted the consumer. A third-party payer system that simply means that the government had monopolised the cost in the background, and what it simply means by that is the fact that the consumer no longer has the freedom to shop around for the cheaper cost. The consumer is essentially out of the equation. You know, in a free market healthcare system, you're talking about capitalism, you're speaking about the consumer having the freedom to shop around and the consumer choosing who they want to go to, who they trust. If they want to pay more, then that's fair enough, right? If they want to pay less, then of course they shop around for the cheaper cost, and there's a straight transaction between the consumer and the provider. That's how a free market, that's how capitalism works in healthcare, right? It was the third party payer system where government had basically monopolised the cost in the background, which simply means that these third parties in the background had a monopoly or the cost, and therefore they get away with a collusion to shaft the consumer, and that's why the collusion took place. In other words, it was his government intervention that created the problem, and there he is blaming the market. Oh my God, man, these people would give you a sore head.
Now, liberals, for their part, are often prepared to allow more positive freedom in the form of entitlements to healthcare, like Medicare for all, public education, and a safe environment.
How the hell did you just draw to the logical conclusion that it's freedom? Basically thieved from the individual to pay for it. How else do you think your public ownership exists? That's like saying, you know what, I've got a right to food, so at any time I can walk into a stranger's house and just take any food out their fridge as I feel like it. Because guess what? I've got a right to food.
But democratic control over investment and production would represent a much more promising model for liberty, since achieving worker control of the workplace would require replacing capitalism's profit motive with solidarity.
How do you expect to run anything efficiently? Never mind to be so-called democratic in the absence of prices. You don't even have a clue what prices are. For those of you who don't understand, check out my video today with the profits and losses, right? And you can also check out my video today with the economic calculation problem. This guy is so ignorant of profits and losses. And I say and losses because it's just as every bit as important as that to do with profits. He's the sort of person that thinks that, you know, profits is just something of a surplus that you fill your own pockets with, and that's it. That's it. That's honestly what they think profits are. These are the sort of people who talk a lot about something they know absolutely nothing about because they've never studied economics. Replacing profits and losses with solidarity. Go say that one about, you know, the Soviet Union's history, for crying out loud. Anyway, I don't know if you've got anything you would like to add in yourself that I might have, you know, forgot or may have missed out or whatever, or anything you'd like to just throw in yourself. Comment in the comment section below, and be sure to like the video, share the video. And again, folk, thank you for watching, and I very much appreciate it. Cheers.